It's my third party, and I will cry if I want to. I might actually cry as well, because this talk is going to be all about the perils, the minefield, the absolute mess that is third-party scripts, third-party assets, third-party code. I'm willing to bet that every website you've ever built has had one, if not a handful, of third-party scripts installed on it. And the reason we do that is usually convenience, right? We don't want to build our own analytics. We don't know how to build our own analytics, or somebody else can build it better. So we defer a lot of that task, that work, to somebody else, mainly just for convenience. We want to give somebody else the effort of doing that thing, because it's not what we focus on. In giving away that kind of effort, we also give away a little bit of control. We start to accept risk. We start to let unknown quantities onto our website. We don't really know exactly what's going on all of the time. So that invites risk from a performance point of view, which is what I'm mainly going to focus on, but also security. And it invites kind of a lot of danger that a lot of my clients, I'm a consultant, don't tend to be aware of. So hopefully the next 40, 45 minutes, we're going to look at identifying the risks, measuring the risks of third parties, and then designing around them, being a little more robust, a little more resilient, and designing around third-party problems. So yeah, I'm Harry. I'm a consultant performance engineer from the UK. What I found is I work for myself. I update my job title every couple of years, and whatever I change it to is what people start hiring me for. So if you work for yourself, pro tip, just to invent a job title. Start doing that work. It's my job mainly to work with quite large clients because they feel the benefits of performance a lot more than some smaller clients would, I guess. But I've been very fortunate in my career. I've worked with some very wonderful, very lovely clients. And every single person on this screen has suffered at least some kind of third-party performance issue, a performance degradation that was completely not their fault, but still affected them. And it's my job to help them identify that, or it's part of my job to help them identify that and design around it. I'm also, I guess, performance ambassador is my official title, but I've started working recently alongside a company called Shift Commerce. So is there anybody in here who works in e-commerce? Anybody working on an e-commerce platform? Right, so part of my job now is to make e-commerce fast by default, identifying the problems that retailers face. Third parties are really common in e-commerce because you need to measure abandonment, you need to do A/B testing, and everything you add to the site in the kind of attempt to make more money is actually going to make the site a little bit slower. So there's like an interesting cross-section there, and it's now part of my job to work out what that is. When I was preparing a talk about third parties, my mind immediately went to this news story, and it's quite an old news story. It's from 2008. But my mind immediately went to this news story from Australia, because this news story covers a lot of parallels. It covers parties, uninvited guests, and it covers financial repercussions.
Well, it's the real-life risky business. A teenager holds an alcohol-fueled party for hundreds of kids while his unsuspecting parents are on holiday. 16-year-old Corey Worthington is now facing not only the wrath of mum and dad, but a $20,000 fine from police. I spoke to him a short time ago. Corey, thanks for joining us. The only question that I can think to ask is, what were you thinking?
I wasn't really.
Did your parents say you could have a party?
No.
So
they didn't.
Why did you?
I don't know, it was just a get-together with a couple of mates at first, and then we thought we might as well just have a bit of a party, and then it sort of just got out of hand, and yeah.
I fucking hate that guy. I hate that guy so much. The nipple ring makes it though, right? But watching this, it's completely true, right? Well, actually, it's not completely true, but he ends with the sentence, "It just got out of hand." Like, oh, it's not my fault it got out of hand. But then I realized that actually there are even more parallels, because third-party performance and generally bad performance on websites is when something just got out of hand. Nobody set out to build an on-purpose slow website. It's usually a case of no one was keeping an eye on things, the team weren't taking mutual responsibility. In fact, the last time I spoke at an event in Poland, I heard the phrase, mutual disownership. Everyone thinks it's somebody else's problem, right? That kind of is a really interesting thing for me to realize this thing that everyone else thinks everybody else is doing that job or solving that problem. And a client got in touch with me earlier this year. They're like, "Harry, we think we've got a problem with third parties. It's kind of bad." I was like, "Don't worry, I've seen it all. Nothing scares me anymore. Just send it over, I'll take a look." This one did scare me. This one was quite bad. The green that is currently on screen right now, the green box, is basically what the developer had spent their day building. It's what the entire dev and design team had spent their days creating. This is the website. This is the web page that a customer would see. They thought they'd done a good job. Not too many things going on there. It's reasonably fast, I guess. It's not too bad. But then, as soon as the site went live, things looked very different. Wow. It made me realize that a big part of the problem is a disconnect. Your dev site is very clean, it's very fresh, it's running on a very powerful machine, it's running over a local network. Your dev site is a very different beast to what your production environment looks like. Your production environment has your analytics, your retargeting, it has your A/B testing tool, it has your ads, it has whatever it's got on there, never runs on localhost. It doesn't run until it's live. So as a developer, what you're building feels nice and contained and very sort of manageable. As soon as it goes live, things get very, very different. Now, please give me an honest show of hands. Who isn't sure what a tag manager is? Who hasn't heard of a tag manager? Cool, well, it's enough people that I'll quickly explain it. Picture the scenario. You're a front-end developer, you're at work, and the marketing department say, hey, can you install Google Analytics? And you're like, sure, I'll do it later. And you just paste the code into the page and it's done. Then the next day, they're like, can you install this A/B testing tool? And you're like, I'm kind of busy, so I'll do it tomorrow. And the marketing department get annoyed. It shouldn't take this long to install this. It shouldn't take this long to add this script to the page. So companies created what's known as a tag manager. And with a tag manager, as a developer, all you do is install one line of JavaScript. That line of JavaScript is like a conduit to a CMS-style interface somewhere, Adobe Tag Manager, Google Tag Manager. And in that little admin panel, your marketing department can add whatever they want. Oh, we want to add this analytics tool? Let's just paste it in here. We want to add this that I found on Stack Overflow from 9 years ago, paste it in there. And all of a sudden, your marketing department is writing production JavaScript. Not production quality JavaScript, definitely not, but it's going live, and it's skipping the entire dev process. None of the engineers get to look at this code before it goes live. This is how the red happens without the developer realizing it. It's because of third parties. So in this talk, I want to break it down into 4 main parts. Understand the kind of risks that third parties present, audit and measure that risk, discuss that risk with the relevant people, and finally mitigate that risk, design around it. Now I could do a full entire workshop just on third parties. We've only got like 45 minutes in total this morning. I'm going to try and hammer through this as quickly as possible, but starting with understanding the problem. How can third parties affect your site? The first way they could affect you, and the one I understand the least, is security. You're basically inviting somebody else into your home. And you've got to hope that they are the person you think they are, right? If you're pulling a third party that's coming from an insecure origin, at the very simplest, the most basic, what's going to happen is you'll get mixed content warnings, right? Now, that's not in and of itself problematic. But if you're running an e-commerce site, and all of a sudden Chrome tells the visitor that this site is not secure, that's going to erode consumer trust. That's immediately going to make people suspicious of you, even though it's not your fault. If you are pulling from insecure origins, you then open the sort of possibility of that third party could be compromised. It could get man in the middle. It could get somehow compromised, and that could affect your customers that way. There's also the less considered option, or the less considered scenario, that maybe the third party is just a scumbag anyway, right? And that can happen. I'll show you something in a second. I was flying to Iceland 2017, 2016 maybe, to give a talk there. And I always buy the in-flight Wi-Fi because I'm a bit of a mug. But I can't believe we can fly. The fact we can get Wi-Fi up there now is crazy, so I always buy the in-flight Wi-Fi. At the time, my site, I look really creepy just staring at you from up there. My site could run over a secure or an insecure connection. So this was visiting my site via the Iceland Air Wi-Fi service over an insecure connection. So you'll notice up here, you may not, I'm getting man in the middle. Iceland Air are now advertising back to me on my own website. But the performance degradation here is more interesting. I'm getting downgraded to an H1.0 connection. Whatever Iceland Air's proxy server is running H1.0. My site actually runs over H2. It's actually quite a fast website. But go through this proxy server, everything was getting slowed down. I was getting man in the middle. This is an interesting one. Last year, I think, No, even earlier this year, sorry. The American date format, the 1st to the 26th. Sorry, I just a moment to myself there. YouTube were busted running crypto mining ads on their site, right? There was a crypto mining ad running on YouTube.com. It was leeching off of users' CPUs to make bitcoins. So sometimes the third party is just a bad actor. Sometimes third parties are not doing what they say they are, and they're not actually there for like the good they claim. So at a minimum, to mitigate this, I would say pull everything from a secure origin. If your third-party provider doesn't run their stuff over a secure connection, avoid, right? So red flag, don't use them. But then this does lead to direct performance benefits such as H2, Brotli, Service Worker. These are only things we can use over a secure connection. We can't use any of these web platform features over HTTP. We have to use HTTPS. So I would advise whenever you're auditing or assessing a third party, ensure that they are always sending things over a secure connection. Next thing, delays. It doesn't take me to tell a room full of web developers that delays online or on the web are bad for business, right? Slow websites don't convert as quickly, they don't retain users as well, and they don't make as much money. That delay could be on the network between the first and third party. What if there is just network congestion? What if you're on a slow connection? What if there is high packet loss on a particular connection? It could be a delay between first and third parties that way. Or it could be third-party infrastructure that could be suffering. What if the third party is having an outage? What if the third party is getting DDoSed, right? What if they are suffering on their kind of back end, I guess? And the other problem is, what if everything arrives on time, but the third party is really badly optimized? It's completely unoptimized, and it's running very expensive JavaScript that arrives really quickly. There are no network delays. There is no kind of DDoS happening at all, but the code or the assets that arrive are really badly optimized. A friend and client of mine called Ryan, this is me quoting a friend quoting somebody else. He runs an e-commerce startup in Leeds, where I'm from, and he had concerns about a particular third party. He was worried that a third party was running slowly, so he got on a call with them. And he said, look, I'm really concerned. I think your third party is slowing our page down. And the third party provider said back to him, there is zero performance overhead to using our synchronous script. Our typical response time is around 200 milliseconds. It's like, well, pick one. Is it 0 or is it 200 milliseconds? You just contradicted yourself in one sentence there. But they were completely oblivious to the fact that 200 milliseconds is a big number. It's a huge number when we talk about web performance. To contextualize that, I worked with Trainline last year, and we found that by speeding the website up by just 0.3 seconds, so 300 milliseconds, customers would spend an extra £8.1 million every year. So kind of proportionately, that 200 milliseconds to Trainline would be worth 5.4 mil. That's not zero overhead anymore, is it? It's quite tangible. Mobify found that for every 100 millisecond decrease, they saw 1.11% increase in revenue. Basically, that 200 milliseconds to Mobify would be $750,000 a year. So not as much as Trainline, but still, it would be a good Christmas party with $750,000, right? You wouldn't turn that down. My favorite one, this is eye-watering, Walmart. They found for every 100 millisecond improvement, they would see up to a 1% increase in revenue. And you think 1%, not worth chasing. When you consider how rich, how filthy, disgusting, horrible rich Walmart is, a 1% increase is for 100 milliseconds. So if we can get that 200 milliseconds for them, 2% increase in revenue, Walmart is making an extra $230 million a year for 200 milliseconds. So I just looked up Walmart's accounts for 2017. They posted revenue, or e-commerce only revenue, of something like 11-point-something billion dollars. A 1% uptick in revenue, 230 million, right? That 200 milliseconds is not as innocent as it was made out to be. Now, delays are one thing, but it can get worse. What happens if there is a single point of failure? What if you've got a critical third party that goes missing? What if your web font provider has an outage? What if you've got a critical third party that goes offline? This is the worst case scenario, and it's very, very, very important to consider. What happens if you've got a critical third party and it's down? I had this exact thing with a client of mine in the UK. So hopefully what we should see is, this is sky.com, and you, oh no, it's cropped. Very, 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 very cropped. So this video is all but useless now. I'll post this on YouTube, you can watch the video later. But what has happened is we've tried to visit sky.com, and we're just seeing a blank page. What you can see, thankfully, is this script here is pending. This script is a third-party tag manager. This is a tag manager hosted over on Adobe, Adobe Tag Manager, and it's gone down. It's got an outage. It's suffering an outage. What you can't see, unfortunately, is the title tab in Chrome doesn't say any of that title text. It doesn't say Sky TV and broadband. It just says https www.sky.com. Because that third-party script is suffering an outage. It's blocking the parser. The parser hasn't managed to make it down to the title element yet. We haven't even managed to render the title in the browser. All the HTML has arrived. 100% of the page's HTML is on the device. But the parser blocking script, because they're having an outage, is completely giving a blank screen. My argument here is there is no way that your analytics is more important than the website. If your analytics can take the website offline, what are you measuring anyway? Always, always, always load analytics, tracking, etc. asynchronously. It's completely bizarre to me that someone would choose to block rendering to try and measure something. It's like, well, if you do that, what you're measuring is already broken. It took 1.3 minutes before Chrome finally decided, oh, there must be an outage, let's move on. Yeah, you can see 1.3 minute load. Oh, did you just put that? We don't really have 1.3 minutes to spare, so I'm not going to do it all again. It's quite boring. But yeah, now you can see 1.3 minutes. It finally times out. You can see the tab now. But a user was looking at a blank screen for 1.3 minutes. That's enough time for them to assume, oh, this site's down. I'll go and take my money somewhere else. In e-commerce, this is just crippling. You cannot get away with this. And it's not just JavaScript. It's not just Adobe Tag Manager. If you're just linking to Google Fonts with link rel equals style sheet, who's using Google Fonts? We all are. Of course we are. Who's just doing link rel equals style sheet, href equals whatever? I mean, you all are. I know. I do the same. If Google Fonts has an outage, we get the same thing. We don't load, we don't get DOM content loaded, we don't get a load event, we don't get anything. We get a blank screen for 1.3 minutes. So this isn't unique to JavaScript. This isn't unique to tag managers. This is any third-party blocking asset. If it has an outage, we suffer big time. So how do we audit this? How do we measure this? It's all well and good being aware of it, but how do we feed that back to our clients, our managers, or whoever needs to hear it? I'm going to go through some really quick kind of workflows that I go through when I try and audit third-party performance. The first thing I do is a very, very high-level sweep of the website, just a general, I'm getting an idea of if third parties are a problem or not. Get your phones ready. I want you to take a picture of this URL on the next slide. This URL is really useful. What I do is I make use of a tool called requestmap. Requestmap.webperf.tools will take a given web page and it will build a complete network diagram of all the third parties that page links to. This means I can get a good idea of like the map, the network effect of third-party assets and their third parties and their third parties and so on. Now, before I actually use this tool, I kind of I don't cheat, but I do a bit more of an extra step. Before I come back to this tool, I use a tool called Web Page Test. Who's used Web Page Test before? Everybody in my workshop yesterday knows way too much about Web Page Test now. Web Page Test, test the performance of a given URL, and it will give you the data. And you can grab a unique URL. My clicker's got a mind of its own this morning. You got its unique ID, and we can feed that directly into Requestmap. Requestmap will take a valid Web Page Test ID. You just plug it in like this. And what that's going to give you is something that my clients and I have lovingly called the jellyfish. This network diagram shows you the first party and everywhere it links to. The size of each blob represents the amount of kilobytes from that domain. The distance between the blobs represents the average time to first byte between those two domains. And the thickness of each line represents the number of requests. This is CNN.com. It's their international edition, I believe. But we can see here there's a lot of third parties just for a simple, like one page of CNN.com. But as an engineer, this is really great for marketing departments. As an engineer, what we want is data, right? We want to get the raw data. So we can actually grab the CSV from this, this diagram. And it gives us this nice, basically a CSV file, a spreadsheet full of important information. Who is the third party? What kind of thing are they solving? What is the performance metrics attached to that third party? Don't laugh, I don't write much awk at all, but if you get the slides for this talk, you can copy and paste this into your terminal. This will just automatically grab every third-party domain from that spreadsheet. It will discard all the other information, and it will grab every third-party domain. And with that information, you can go back to Web Page Test. And in web page test, the slides were already online, so don't worry. In web page test, there's this amazing block feature. Once I've got a list of every third-party domain, I can rerun a performance test with all of those domains missing. I can just run a test saying, show me how fast this website is, but don't load content from any of these third parties. It will block them all, and that gives me a really good proxy of how bad is the third-party problem. What's the before and after? What we can see here is the load event after you remove third parties is much, much faster, much faster. But also, we'll notice that start render and speed index are largely unaffected. There isn't too much to worry about here. This tells me that there are a lot of third parties, and they are pushing back the load event, but they don't seem to be blocking rendering. They don't seem to be on the critical path. So maybe the number of third parties is concerning, but the way they are implemented maybe is quite safe. But if we look at different metrics, the number of requests going out, this would be particularly interesting to us if we were running over HTTP 1.1 perhaps. But the number of requests, if we disable third parties, is reduced by 4.2 times. Now requests, we don't worry about them too much with H2. If they're coming from different domains, we don't worry too much either. But TCP connections have a CPU cost. Your phone needs to keep opening TCP connections to different origins. That's going to start running your battery down. Or if we look at the number of kilobytes, unfortunately these days, more like megabytes, page weight was reduced by 2.7 times by removing third parties. If you're from a non-EU country, soon to be me, you won't have data roaming. You'll be paying for every megabyte you use. If you turn up for that green box that I showed you earlier, but you're paying to download the big red box, that's going to cost you money. 18% of British people still use a pay-as-you-go phone contract, right? Well, rather, they don't have a phone contract. 18% of British people still have to rock up to a convenience store every week and put like £25 worth of credit on their phone. They're paying for every megabyte we send them. But this test here that I do, my first kind of testing, is very extreme and very non-scientific. It's impractical just to remove every third party. We couldn't get away with that. So looking in a little more detail, what happens if we've got slow origins? It's a really important question to ask. What if Google Fonts is running slowly? What if Google Tag Manager is running slowly? What if Typekit is running slowly? What if Adobe, whatever their analytics tool is called now, is running slowly? That keeps skipping on its own. I might try and avoid using that. It's a really important question to ask. Thankfully, a very easy question to answer by using a tool called Charles Proxy. Anybody used Charles before? A couple of people. Charles is free in the same way that Sublime Text is free. You know, I'll pay for that tomorrow, sure. Charles Proxy, it's basically an HTTP proxy. It proxies traffic between the network and your machine, but it's got a really great feature for throttling. So if you go to the throttle settings in Charles, what you can do is say, look, what happens if my site runs normal speed, but Google Fonts runs slowly? What happens if my site is running normal speed, but my CDN is running slowly? This is obviously more specific than Chrome's own throttling. It's also more accurate than Chrome's throttling. But the ability to pick out single domains and say, run this one slowly, allows you to work out the effect of a slow third party. Going further, what happens if a third party goes down? Again, a critical question to ask. What happens if my third-party payment provider has an outage? What happens if my third-party authentication provider has an outage? Again, very important question to ask, very easy to answer. Web page test make available a black hole server. These slides are already online, so don't worry too much about scribbling this IP address down. But this black hole server is blackhole.webpagetest.org. Don't visit that in your browser. Don't do it. Any traffic that passes through this origin just has an outage. It just disappears. It just gets kind of dropped on the floor. So if in your local hosts file, you can map third-party domains against this IP address and simulate a third-party outage. That was exactly how I did the Google Fonts example. Google Fonts wasn't having an outage, but I'll tell you a quick story. I got a client who their business almost entirely revolves around designing websites and Google Fonts and Typekit and stuff. They use Google Fonts a lot, and several million people make use of it as well because of this client. And I said to them, look, do you have like a service level agreement? Do you have an SLA with Google Fonts? They were like, what's an SLA? I was like, oh shit, okay, sit down. If Google Fonts has an outage, they don't owe you a penny. They can take you offline for 1.3 minutes, but if they have an outage, You didn't sign an agreement. They didn't sign an agreement with you. That 1.3 minutes could cost an e-commerce site millions in revenue. If every customer in the world is suffering a 1.3 minute blank page, that could perceivably cost someone millions of dollars. Google Fonts doesn't owe you a penny. They never agreed to be up 100% of the time. They never agreed to have that kind of availability. So I reached out to someone at Google Fonts. I was like, hey, look, you don't publish SLAs online. You don't publish your current status of like your uptime, nor do you publish historical uptime status. And they replied saying, yeah, it's because like we've never had an outage in the 9 years we've been running. I was like, okay. Google Fonts is statistically very safe, but this could happen to you. So it's very, very, very worthwhile checking which third parties could give you this 1.3 minute load time. Any third-party JavaScript file that is not async, or any third-party CSS file leaves you prone to this. Interesting scenario here. What happens if a file goes missing? So not that they have an outage. It's not kind of like a delay. What if a file just, for some reason, doesn't make it to the user's device properly? This is a lot more rare, but it does happen. Jake Archibald said this very, very succinctly a few years ago. All your users are non-JS whilst they're downloading your JavaScript. I've got a somewhat controversial opinion, which is we should not optimize for people who disable JavaScript. Don't optimize for the use case that someone doesn't have JavaScript enabled. If they've disabled JavaScript, they knew what they were doing. You probably have more IE6 users than I've disabled JavaScript users. There's very little point catering to that market. However, this is the important bit, I do believe we should consider how well our JavaScript fails. So don't build for someone who's turned JavaScript off, but build under the assumption or the fear that JavaScript might not make it. That JavaScript might fail. That JavaScript might get blocked by an overzealous third-party content blocker. This happened for real a few years ago. T-Mobile, the sort of cell provider, and most cell providers do this. Whenever you're visiting websites, they proxy it all through their servers. And they'll look at an image and say, oh, this image is way too big. I'll minify it, compress it and optimize it, and then pass it on. Oh, somebody's left comments in this CSS file. I'll delete the comments and I'll pass it on. Someone hasn't gzipped this JavaScript. I'll gzip it and pass it on. So you're always getting proxied by your sort of cell provider. So a few years ago, T-Mobile looked inside jQuery and they saw a /star. They're like, oh, someone's left a comment inside jQuery. I'll start deleting it. And they start deleting, and they stop deleting as soon as they get to the closing //. But they never found a closing // because it wasn't a comment. It was a regular expression. It was a string. So T-Mobile just deleted 2/3 of jQuery and passed it on to their users thinking, aren't we kind? That was a good job we just did. Have a third of jQuery. And it broke the internet for several days for hundreds of thousands of users. I was working with a client only recently, honestly 4 weeks ago, maybe even less. I was working with a client and they had a single page app built in Angular, and we rolled a release, sent it live. All of a sudden, Twitter started going a bit angry with, hey, this site doesn't work on my iPhone. And we were like, shit, what do we do? It took us a long time to track it down. A very specific version of iOS Safari, moments.js was returning the date object as a string. And the entire app was just like, don't know what to do with that. And it just failed. Right? Complete catastrophic JavaScript error. Nothing would run. We had no way of defending against this. There was no part of the app that said, hey, have we booted successfully? If not, we should probably mention to the user that, hey, something's gone wrong. It's really easy to design around this. We could design around this if we chose, but we didn't. So if your JavaScript fails, how well do you handle it? Again, easy to answer that question. In DevTools, find the JavaScript file you're interested in, right-click, block request URL. Anytime you reload the page now, it will load the page with that file in question missing. It's not a 404. You won't get a 404 response header. It's not an outage, so you won't get any kind of TCP network timeout. It will just refuse to request that file. This is a single-page app with a client I was working with earlier this year. And if we got rid of vendor.js, we showed an infinite loading spinner. Programmatically, we could have handled that better. We could have said, something's gone wrong, please try refreshing the browser. Yeah, it's gone wrong again. Can you log a support ticket or something? But we did nothing. We just gave an infinite loading spinner. We can design around this. The next thing is, let's assume there was no outage, all the files arrived, there was no network delay. We might incur runtime cost. Runtime cost is interesting because it's much harder to measure and it's much less obvious to us because everyone's device is different. A network delay affects anyone regardless of their device, but runtime cost is very specific to that user. As a performance engineer, I really enjoy the ability to blame somebody else. It's nice because I still get paid and I get to put my feet up and someone else fixes it. So if we want to find out if a third party is causing us problems, it's very easy to point fingers. It's very easy to find out who's causing us a problem. In DevTools, you want to run a performance profile in the Performance tab. Find the summary panel at the bottom, then go to Bottom Up. And in Bottom Up, we've got a thing called Group by Domain, which basically gives us this. If I group by domain, I can see that actually the first party is the most expensive. It makes sense. We're a single-page app. We're a client-rendered React application. It makes sense to me that we are the most expensive runtime domain. However, instead of grouping by domain, what if we group by file? Shit. Now we've got a problem. Our tag manager is more costly at runtime than all of React. Somehow, our tag manager is the most expensive single attributable URL on this page. That's concerning. The nice thing as well is you can update this view in real time. You can kind of scrub across the timeline, and you can see as the page is being built, who is the most expensive. What you've hopefully noticed there is that for the first few, sort of certainly hundreds of milliseconds, third-party content was taking more CPU cycles than first-party. Somehow, we were giving more runtime to third parties ahead of first-party. Simple fix here is just defer all of that third-party stuff. After we've audited this stuff, it's now time for the awkward bit, which is the discussion. How do we discuss this with the marketing department who love these third parties? How do we discuss it with the third-party providers themselves and let them know that they're doing kind of not great? It's my job as a consultant to have these awkward conversations, and I've got quite used to having these discussions. But the first thing I hear from any client is, oh, they're a necessary evil. We don't want to use third parties, but we have to. And the problem is it's nowhere near as black and white as that. See what I did? That's very artistic, isn't it? Black and white. This is so lazy. It's a necessary evil. Well, necessary, I mean, is a Bitcoin tracking thing, a Bitcoin mining thing necessary? Absolutely not. And it is definitely evil. Is typekit necessary? Probably not. You could design a nice system font UI. I'm pretty certain you could. But is typekit evil? I wouldn't have said so. It's a font provider, right? Necessary evil is a phrase that people just use to, oh, we don't want to discuss third parties. They're a necessary evil. We don't want to, but we have to. It's like, you don't have to, and you don't necessarily want to. We need to be a bit more sort of diligent than that. So it's my job to kind of drill down and help my clients and their third-party providers understand what they do need, what they don't need, what they can get rid of, what they can replicate themselves, but also discussing it with the third-party providers themselves. If you've got a suspicion that a particular third party is causing you problems, you are probably correct. But my advice here is triple check that you're correct, right? Form a hypothesis. I think this third-party payment provider is running slowly. That's your hypothesis. But two, this is the most important bit, two, gather the data. There's nothing more embarrassing, trust me, I've been there, nothing more embarrassing than ringing a third-party provider saying, yeah, you're really bad, you're really slow. And they're like, you've just implemented it wrong. Definitely check it's not your fault. Gather all the data you can and then raise it with them, let them know. Sometimes letting third parties know about problems can be quite difficult. They can be quite opaque. It might just be someone that you're using. How would you let Google Fonts know they're running slowly? They don't have a forum. They don't have a support ticket thing. They don't really have anything. So there's many different ways you can get in touch with a third-party provider. Yeah, support tickets if they're available. If you're paying money for a third party, there's probably some kind of help desk you can go to. If you're paying a lot of money, you might even have an account manager. You could get on the phone with someone. But a lot of third parties aren't as approachable as that. Maybe they've got issues or pull requests or a community forum you can go to. If not, defer to point 4. I do this quite a lot. It's just tweet at them. People listen when Twitter tells them because all of a sudden it becomes a PR thing, right? A support queue is, oh, it's where it's meant to be. It's a support request. We can deal with that in 48 hours because that's what our agreement is. As soon as it's on Twitter, it's public. And people are like, shit, someone's complaining. Look into it. My ad provider, I asked them, hey, can you just put rel equals now opener on your links? It'd be really beneficial for security and performance. About 4 weeks later, that was live. They did it. DHL were running a web app which was taking customer data, addresses, passwords, right? Not credit card information, but it was login and it was address information. They were running it over a completely insecure connection. Now, they could run HTTPS. I checked, because as soon as I saw the not secure thing, I was like, I'm going to manually type the S in there for myself. Turns out it worked. They just weren't redirecting it. So I just tweeted them, hey, look, can you just force this onto a secure connection? About 8 days later, it was done. This one is interesting. Lotame, never heard of them, never heard of Lotame. They're a third party of mine, third party. So we call them fourth parties, right? My ad provider was linking out to someone called Lotame who was giving me mixed content warnings. I tweeted at Lotame saying, hey, look, any chance you can look into this? It's not great. Their CTO replied, like, oh, yeah, we'll look into it. Fix within a matter of hours. I mean, the blue tick helps, I will say that, but the point I'm making here is absolutely start somewhere. Saying nothing at all means it's not going to get fixed. Just find out where that company is online, find them on something, and just reach out to them that way. If that's the only way you've got of contacting them, use it. Doing something is better than doing nothing at all, and it can have surprisingly good effect. Now, discussing third parties with third parties is actually quite easy because it's their job to do a good job, right? It's their job to not give me mixed content warnings. It's their job not to be slow. However, discussing third parties with your marketing team is not easy because their job is to put those things on the site. And it's very, very, very ineffective to rock up to your marketing team and say, everything you do from Monday to Friday makes this website worse. They are not going to respond well to that at all, right? They're not going to respond. So it's really important at this point to have a softly approach and discuss and raise these issues in a really productive way with your marketing department or whoever that is. So remember the CSV file we had before? The little sort of jellyfish CSV file? I'm going to reuse that, and I do this a lot with my clients I work with. We can drag that information into this kind of Google Sheets. One thing I've found is that clients, especially non-technical clients, they love a spreadsheet. If it's in a spreadsheet, they'll trust it. I've started sending my invoices in spreadsheets because they'll just pay me, right? What this spreadsheet is showing is all the third parties that a given page was utilizing. Yellow is duplicates. So we've got more than one Twitter. We've got more than one Google. We've got more than one social media. So this is categorizing duplicate third parties. If you've got 5 analytics packages, that's where you start to trim the fat. You say, well, we don't need 5, we need 1. The red is severity. So red is a gradient from very, very, very pale, like basically white, all the way to very dark red. And the darker it is, the worse it is. So we want to focus here on things like the amount of kilobytes coming from my ad provider, the amount of kilobytes coming from Twitter. That's what I want to be looking at first. Now, this is a bit of a boring next step, but if you want to use this spreadsheet, I'm going to give you a URL for it. If you want to use it, you need to pay attention to this next bit. It's an awkward bit of implementation detail. Grab a CSV from the request map, download that CSV, and what you're going to do is import it over the top of this spreadsheet. So, file, import, and the key bit here is, find it on disk, find it on the device. The key bit here is this, replace data at selected cell. This is an oddly specific, boring part of a talk, but if you don't do this, the whole thing is pointless. Replace data at selected cell. It will drop your third-party audit straight over the top of this conditional formatting, and this is now what CNN looks like. All of a sudden, you've got all the categorized data from the third parties your website is using in a nice, convenient spreadsheet. You know who is worse, you know what duplicates there are, and the important thing here is column H, the notes column. The notes column is blank on purpose, because the next step, the next thing we do is we ask, we don't tell. We don't rock up to the marketing team and tell them, hey, look how bad you've made the website. We're removing it all. Use this as a chance to learn something. Gather the data, organize a meeting, ask them things like, hey, can you tell me why we use Tag Manager? What do we use it for? We've got an A/B testing tool. What tests are currently live? Ask them questions, learn, and make notes and listen, because the easiest way to solve this problem is to understand exactly where it came from. Questions, I won't go through them all because we don't really have time, but my favorite one is the bottom one. Are there any services in here that we don't recognize? And the answer is always yes. Or there'll be something like, oh wow, the intern 4 years ago set this up, but we never actually paid for a full account. We shouldn't be using that. I found a client recently. They were using an A/B testing tool. I think it was an A/B testing tool. Yeah, it was like, I won't name the A/B testing tool, but it was 0.5 megabyte of JavaScript. 0.5 megabyte of JavaScript landed on the device. Incredibly high runtime cost, very high network cost. And I was like, look, this is huge. They were like, oh wow, we closed our account down with them 2 years ago. We literally can't use this, but we're still downloading 500 kilobytes of data from them. I was like, get rid of it. That URL there, the slides are online, don't panic. That URL there is where you can find this spreadsheet. It's a template that you can duplicate for yourselves. You can plug this data in and start categorizing things that way. I've got about 5 minutes to get through the whole last section of the talk, so I'm going to have to speed up a little bit. Mitigate. The last part of the talk is, how do we actually design around this? Like, it's all well and good understanding how we're affected and what the knock-on effect can be. How do we actually design around this? Well, the first thing I would recommend, and we covered this in my workshop yesterday, is self-host anything that you can. Don't hotlink jQuery from code.jquery.com. Don't use the Bootstrap CDN. Unless you absolutely have to, do not self-host anything. Do not third-party host anything. Unless you absolutely have to, just do not let other people control critical assets. Oh my goodness, that woke me up. If you self-host, you've got controlled infrastructure, you can dictate your own caching strategies, you can do way more with that asset, you can preload it, you can start to preemptively load that file. So where possible, self-host any critical assets. If you can have it on your own servers, do so. There's no point leaving a critical asset such as Bootstrap on Bootstrap CDN. If they go down, you go down, but Bootstrap CDN don't have an SLA. They don't owe you a penny if they take you offline for 1.3 minutes. Load everything asynchronously. Always use the asynchronous method of loading a third party. If a third party doesn't provide an asynchronous loading method, that's a red flag. Don't use them. They haven't considered the impact on you if they go offline. Certain third parties don't have a way of asynchronously loading their code, which means they've never once considered, what if we go down? All of our customers would be affected. If there isn't an async loading method, be suspicious. The fix for this sky.com problem was as easy as, let's stick an async attribute on there. That's all it needed to be. That would have completely solved that 1.3 minute problem. Resource hints. Anybody heard of resource hints? Anybody using resource hints? Anybody using DNS prefetch? Things like that? Okay, that's a resource hint. That's the proper name for them. If we hit a lot of third parties, we're going to be opening a lot of new TCP connections. DNS, TCP, TLS. There's a lot of network negotiation going on there. If we know we hit important third parties, we can warm that connection up. We can open it preemptively using something like pre-connect. Audit your page. You might have a font provider, some social media stuff, an ad network. Audit your page and find out which third-party domains you visit most frequently. And then this. If it's this page, pre-connect these third parties. If it's this page, pre-connect these. Otherwise, just pre-connect this one. This will preemptively open connections to all of these third parties before the page is immediately ready for them. It makes third-party negotiation much cheaper, much faster. Here is my site before I enabled pre-connect. At the very last, most inopportune moment, I'm saying, oh, where is this IP address? Where's this server? Open a connection. I'm doing it at the very, very, very last moment. Simply by enabling pre-connect, I can divorce the network negotiation from the file download completely. I'm saving hundreds of milliseconds here. And remember, hundreds of milliseconds is worth 8.1 mil to train line. Imagine writing one line of HTML and seeing 8.1 mil extra in the bank. But only warm up frequent, significant, known origins, so audit every page. Don't warm up youtube.com if only one page on your site embeds a YouTube video, that kind of thing. Really quickly now, CSP. Anybody using CSP? Nice, a few people. If you're not, look into it. It's dead simple. Actually, it's not. It's really simple syntax, but I implemented CSP on my site, and I bricked it completely. Completely ruined my site for about half a day. But it's fascinating. CSP is a way of saying, hey, look, we will only let these domains load images. We will only let these domains load JavaScript. What you can say is that basically you can whitelist domains. You can say, look, I will allow images from my image transformation provider. I will allow JavaScript from Google Analytics. Every other kind of asset, we can only load it from the self, like the current domain. Support of this is pretty good, so we should start using CSP pretty soon. CSP is great for defining what kind of assets we can run, or what kind of assets we can load. Step on from that is feature policy. Anybody using feature policy? Good, because it's impossible, it's not ready yet. But when it is, it'll be great. Feature policy, where CSP defines what kind of files we can load, CSP defines what those files can do. On my site, it would be easy for me to say, nobody's allowed to use the microphone, nobody's allowed to use the webcam, nobody's allowed to use geolocation, nobody needs it, my site doesn't do that. And this helps you protect, it's more of a privacy thing, but this allows you to safeguard customers' users from malicious intent. Support for this is, like, yeah, it's not great. It's experimental in Chrome, it's not usable anywhere, but keep an eye on it, it's going to be interesting. Sub-resource integrity, who's using SRI? wow, definitely use this. Most third-party providers nowadays give SRI for free. So resource integrity basically gives you the integrity attribute that you can load on a script or a style sheet or whatever. This is just a hash of the file that you expect. And what this means is that the file, if you're loading jQuery 1.2.3 or whatever, that's immutable. It's always going to be 1.2.3, unless it gets man-in-the-middled. So what you can do is you can take a hash of jQuery 1.2.3, stick it in the integrity attribute, and the browser will make sure that the file you've requested matches the hash you were expecting. SRI, again, pretty good browser support, so might as well use it immediately. Last thing, I promise. Priority hints. You actually look like a bouncer. Like with the black T-shirt and the muscles. I'm getting a bit worried. Priority hints. These are very, very new. We looked at these in my workshop yesterday. Priority hints allow us to do this. We've got an important attribute. So we can actually define that, hey, this is unimportant to the page. My ads are unimportant, but my own CSS is important equals high. This is very, very new. If you just Google priority hints, you'll find the spec. But these are things we can start to use to allow the browser to schedule resources a little more effectively. The very last thing I can do to safeguard you against third-party problems is the laziest slide. This is going to be the most annoying slide in the whole talk, but the biggest tool we've got is just restraint. Try and avoid that third analytics package. Try and avoid having 5 different font managers. My clients all hear the same thing from me. Use as little as possible for as long as possible. If you just avoid adding third parties left, right, and center, if you avoid just adding everything to your site, all of this talk becomes irrelevant. You don't need to worry about security concerns with third parties. You need to worry about third-party outages. So the biggest single tool you've got is restraint. That's me saying thank you very much for listening. I'm around for the rest of the conference. If you've got any questions at all, come and find me. The slides are already online. Thank you very much.